Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ray Baca, and I have been in the LGBTQ+ Services Committee for over 5 years now. The committee holds a special place in my heart, and I am so happy to be part of an amazing group of people who work hard to reach and serve our queer community every day. I am very excited to welcome you all to the first event in our Author Talk series. This is a special year for us because Pima County Public Library's LGBTQ+ Services Committee is celebrating its 25th anniversary. The committee was first established in 1997, and to this day, we are still one of the few public libraries in the country to have an established services committee dedicated to serving the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities. As part of our 25th anniversary Author Talk series, we will have members of our committee, past and present, share their favorite moments or current projects that our committee has worked on in the last 25 years. One of my favorite projects is our Instagram page. We started the Instagram page in the fall of 2020 as an attempt to reach and connect with our community despite the ongoing pandemic. Since then, we have gained over 1,200 followers and built many connections. From book lists and book reviews to memes and community events, we post a wide range of content. You can follow us at pimalibrary.lgbtq. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank the Friends of the Pima County Public Library for making programs like this possible, and to Pima County Library leadership for their continued support. We are so happy to kick off our 25th anniversary Author Talk series with our very own Jessica Pryde to talk about her brand new book. Black Love Matters, Real Talk on Romance, Being Seen, and Happily Ever Afters is Jessica's first publication. Black Love Matters is an incisive intersectional essay anthology that celebrates and examines romance, romantic media, through the lens of Black readers, writers, and cultural commentators. Jessica will answer audience questions at the end of the event, so feel free to jot down potential questions for Jessica that you can submit when we open our Q&A. Collaborating with us today is the library's Kindred team, whose mission is to reach, support, and celebrate our Black community. Special thanks to Tanisha Phillips for joining us in conversation with Jessica for today's event. Make sure to check out our Kindred's webpage on our website at library.pima.gov for tons of great content like blogs, book lists, and events. We'll drop the link in the chat. Again, thank you all for joining us to celebrate our 25th anniversary. I am very happy to introduce Jessica Pryde.
Hello, everyone. So, as Ray mentioned, I'm Jessica Pryde. I am a member of both the LGBTQ+ services team and the Kindred team, along with Tanisha, who popped up and disappeared again. And my first book is Black Love Matters, Real Talk on Romance, Being Seen, and Happily Ever Afters. And I am so happy to be able to help kick off this event, this year of events, with celebrating my book and the voices that offered up their own points of view in it. So that's all I'm going to start with, and I think Tanisha and I are going to have a nice conversation. And please feel free to drop your questions if you have them, and I look forward to answering them later on.
Hello, hi, I'm Tanisha Phillips, chair and co-founder of the Kindred team, and we are so excited to be partnering with the LGBTQ+ committee to celebrate one of our own. Kindred's mission is to reach, celebrate, and support the Black community in Pima County, but also in the library system. And this is one of those moments where we get to do that with another amazing team that celebrates its own committee as well. So, Jessica,
Tanisha,
my friend, my co-conspirator, my sister, I am so excited. Shall we talk your book? Oh, there we go, there it is. I don't know if you all can notice, there's lots of Post-its. There's lots of highlighting. I bought multiple copies of this, so this is the one I'm going to work with, and then I've got a pretty one that I'm going to keep on the shelf. So I'd like to start with something you said in the introduction, and Beverly Jenkins mentioned in her chapter, and it's the quote by Toni Morrison that if there's a book you want to read but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it.
Indeed.
Tell me about that, because from the information you've shared, not only in your interview with the LGBTQ plus committee, which is on the library's website, I would encourage you all to read it if you haven't seen it, but in other conversations you've had with other folks talking about there was, or felt like there was nothing like this that had been published. Was that part of your motivation for writing? Tell us more about it.
So I was inspired to actually try to produce something like this after reading Well-Read Black Girl by Gloria Enem, which is a great book, and it's got a lot of really interesting perspectives that definitely resonated with me. But none of the contributors to that book, which is similar to Black Love Matters, it has a bunch of essays from different people, talked about romance, which is really how I got into reading as a tween, honestly. So I thought about it long and hard about what that would look like from people with my similar background, and sort of reached out to some people who thought it was an idea that not only they had never heard of, but would love to read. And I've heard a lot from people in the romance community, especially in the Black romance community, that this is something that they never knew was missing, but are really glad that they have had the chance to see it.
So you and I know each other personally, and we've served on teams and taught classes, and I've had the honor of getting to know you in a very personal way. And you have talked about moving from DC to Tucson and sort of the culture shock in that. And on page 19 of your book, and this is in the chapter that's written by Allie Parker, she talks about growing up in DC, in a city that, to quote, a city that at one point was over 70% Black. I didn't realize I was one until I left home for college, because DC was so heavily majority minority. It was Chocolate City. So I've heard you talk about, I personally have heard you talk about, so your experience here, moving here, and where the Black community is about 5%. So will you talk and share with us a little bit about that and how that motivated you to, one, be a part of Kindred, do that type of work, but also want to write a book like this?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I moved here in 2014 from DC, where I grew up, left for school, left for more school, and then returned to for 5 years, I think, as an adult. And moving to Tucson was definitely a bit of culture shock. I didn't realize how accustomed to being around people of color I was until I wasn't really anymore, especially since in DC I worked at a high school that was 99.5% Black. So moving here sort of settled in me this need to find a community of Black people, of Black women, of queer people even. Like, I didn't realize how much I was just generally around people like me until I wasn't anymore. So I was happy when I met you and was able to join Kindred and find my people. And where the holes were open, I was able to fill them kind of on Twitter, which I started to heavily use in the last 5 years. And that's where I really found this sort of Black romance community that were sharing books about and by and about Black people, that were more than what you might find on an algorithm in an online bookstore. And that opened my eyes to so much more that I could be consuming and reading and loving. And I was able to find so many people who are, online friend types who can guide me in the right direction, and who brought me into a world of reading that I was able to bring back to the real world, and sort of bring to especially you all, and sort of have that transfer of community on both ends, so that I could sort of spread the love and get it back in return.
I love that you talk about spreading the love, because I am someone who I like mystery, like Michael Conley, Robert Crace, Lee Childs. That was my sweet spot. Mystery, mob, murder, right? I liked that. That was where I was comfortable reading. And before meeting you, had not considered romance. And in the spaces that we shared together, you're a pusher. You're a romance pusher. And I gave it a chance, and then had conversations with you about, okay, so I really liked that. What else is similar to it? So you do a really great job of connecting a person who may be resistant to romance to the genre. And so do you feel like you have a calling for that? Is that, you want everyone to have a happily ever after? Like, where does that come from?
I totally do. I want you to have your happily ever after, whatever that may be. And I just love bringing stories to people and talking about people and lifting them up, and finding stories that I know other people might be looking for, and being able to share them with others, and um, reading as much as I possibly can, just so that I can tell people honestly what's great about it. And I love love stories. Love stories are the best, and romances are a guaranteed cup of tea in a book. Like, anything can happen, because you know that at the end it's going to end well, and I won't be sobbing on my floor because somebody died or something bad happened.
So we're looking for different things in our books. No, just kidding. I do appreciate, for folks who have not gotten a copy of the book, please do. There's a bibliography in the back. So when I started reading, and the contributors were listing titles of things that they had enjoyed or had drawn them into romance, I started making notes, and then I realized, oh, there's a bibliography at the end. Talk about why that was important to include in the book for readers.
I really wanted to make sure that, excuse me, I really wanted to make sure that if something was mentioned, it was collected all in one spot. And of course, partly because librarian, but also, I'm the same way when I'm reading something like that. Oh, that sounds great. And, reading the 1619 Project, I started writing down titles and then realized that they're at the end too, and I could just go see them. But it because this is so much of a book about books in particular. Yeah, there's other stuff about film and television and life, but since there's so much about books, I really wanted to make sure that the ones mentioned, especially in passing, were collected at the end. Miss Bev talks about so many books, and I sort of left those out of the books mentioned in the back because they're so clearly described in her essay. So I figured that would be kind of easy to go back to. But some of the authors will just talk about something and move on, or you're flipping pages trying to figure out where that was or what it was about. So especially having not only listing the books mentioned, but in order of their mentioning, so that it was like, I remember that was kind of at the beginning, but I don't remember which essay it was in, and that kind of thing. So I really wanted to make sure that anyone looking to continue had a place to go to read more.
It's, yeah, my to be read list grew exponentially. And I was like, oh, I don't have to keep bugging Jessica for the next thing that I need to read in romance. I love that you mentioned Miss Beverly Jenkins, the GOAT, as you and I like to refer to her. I love that you started the book with her chapter. Can you tell us more about? I feel like there was lots of historical information that was shared, which was the foundation that was laid and other folks that contributed to the book built on.
Mm-hmm.
Talk more about, one, the bravery in approaching the greatest of all time, but her saying yes, her like getting her work with what? Tell me all the things about that.
Yes, I had to gird the loins, put on the helmet, stretch out, crack the knuckles, do everything to just sit down and send an email. And I am in a place of privilege where I don't like know a lot of romance authors, but I sort of have a little bit of access to them. So I was able to just say, I'm working on this project. We're in the early stages, but I'd love for you to contribute. Would you be interested? And I was amazed at how quickly I got a yes, I'm in, tell me more. But I think that she, as the GOAT, as one of the reigning monarchs of Black romance, as one of the people who has worked so hard to make sure people know the history of the genre, was really supportive and really ready to lay her voice down. And when I had all of the essays compiled and I had hers and I put hers first, I even told my editors, like, you can move everything else around, but I need this to stay where it is because it's the foundation. It's where all of this started. So I really wanted to make sure that before you got into anything else, you knew where we came from.
You and she are very similar, and I had and thank you to you, the opportunity to speak with her at last year's Tucson Festival of Books. She is very humble, as are you. And so I love that two amazing women who love a genre so much and want to move it forward and want to spread the love and get everyone there happily ever after, joined forces. And so I squealed a little bit when I started, and I was like, Beverly. And so I think all of us who are here with you, especially those of us who know you personally, so excited that you girded your loins, as you said, and reached out to her, because one, who can say no to you? Like, but it really is a great way to start the book. I'd like to talk about or like you to talk about. There's a line in your introduction that you say, a happily ever after hasn't always been easy to come by and continues to present challenges. That line stood out to me, and especially as a BIPOC individual, but I know we talked about queer, especially queer BIPOC folks. Why is the happily ever after so hard, or feels so hard to achieve, to see in representation? What are your thoughts on that?
It's something that, you know, especially in contemporary storytelling, whether it's books, whether it's film, I don't think was allowed to be told. So even though we have records of people who were able to live as well as they could in the situations that they lived in, whether it's extramarital because they couldn't get married, or in whatever ways that they were able to, that wasn't a story that the majority culture wanted to tell and the people who were in charge wanted to sell. And even then, it wasn't always the case that people were able to get their happily ever after. They might be able to have a fiery, short-lived relationship that fell into flames because of laws that were unjust, or because of the community they lived in not allowing them to live the way that they wanted, pushing them out or killing them. And the tragic version of that story is one that for some reason has always been grasped by the people in charge. And they're always ready to tell you a story of people who loved and lost, but not who loved and succeeded. So romance and other romantic media actually being able to tell that story is something that we only really started to see in bits and pieces in the second half of the 20th century, and is only really finding its way now in the past 5 to 10 years.
I love that you said that. I wrote, one of the contributors in the book said that love that doesn't end in tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking about Black women and having, finding love, finding romance, having a happily ever after, but also those who identify as queer, the same, right? There's this idea that everything is so traumatic, so painful, you get to the end and your hands are empty.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you just spoke on that. Do you have, this was one of the questions I was going to save to the end, but you just led us there. So what authors, I know there's a bibliography, everyone, bibliography in the back, of authors who do a really amazing job of when you get to the end, you're like, yes, they got all the things. And they're like off into the sunset and they're going to live happily ever after. What are some of your favorite authors who provide that feeling, take you on that journey as the reader? Any authors that immediately come to mind that you would throw out there to folks?
Well, I have a couple of props, and this is the perfect time to use them. One, we've already talked about. One, I can't go a week without talking about. Beverly Jenkins, because goodness gracious, this is Rebel. This is one of my favorites of hers. It's a little newer. Alyssa Cole, God bless her. She can write in any genre, any story, and Once Ghosted, Twice Shy was the first book that her publishing imprint published with a Black queer couple on the cover in print. So that was huge. But I love all of her books. She writes, she is queer and writes all of the pairing types. But this one was particularly stood out, and it's really short. So if you want to try something, try this one. So those are two of my big, like, if you want to start somewhere, start with them. And I'll also throw out Katrina Jackson, who is actually one of my contributors as her government name, Nicole M. Jackson. She is a university professor and romance author, and she knows all of the things. So definitely check out her books. I don't have one on hand because I read a lot of hers digitally, but we have some in the library.
I think you got me hooked on Alyssa Cole. You got me hooked on a lot of things. I loved that in reading this, folks talked about Alyssa Cole. Folks talked about Beverly Jenkins, Rebecca Witherspoon.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca Witherspoon. You got me hooked on her as well. And so it was really, for me, like having this experience of being introduced to different authors, seeing myself in different ways. So one of the contributors talked about that, where you take pieces of yourself from different things that you read,
Mm-hmm.
and put them together, sort of like a puzzle. Yeah, that was really great to see that and have this really personal connection to the things that I've read, that my friend has recommended, that I've gotten from the library, which is also really important in my life. And I get to interlock those. So that was really, this is, okay, anyway, yeah, all right, let's move on. I'll just keep, then I'll start crying and then we don't want to do that. So speaking of Katrina Jackson, on page 65, there's something that really stood out to me at the start of her essay, and it says, there's so much about the history or lack thereof of representations of queer Black women in romance on and off page that has been purposely hidden or ignored and should be unpacked. What do you feel is your calling in the unpacking?
It's finding these stories and making sure that they're heard and found. And I will tell you, in that essay, she talks about Allen Shockley, who is I had never heard of. And I went and found one of her books, and it is fantastic. And it was one of those, it was an early queer Black romance novel written in the early 80s that no one talks about today, but that really made an impact on its readers when it came out. And so finding not just the ones that were released and lost to time, but also making sure that those same stories that are written today are really found and read and shared within and outside of the community, because that's the only way to really make sure that the community is known.
I think, yeah, there's in Adriana Herrera's piece, there was a line about the connection between experience and consciousness, and how that shapes your everyday life. And I think not only as a Black woman, but as a human being, and the power that, of course, you and I are nerdy librarians, so we love to push books, right? But the power in the written word and seeing yourself in the words that you're reading. There was something that you said about windows and mirrors. Will you talk a little bit about that? The importance of what you hold in your hand, whether it's print or whether it's on your phone or whether you're listening to it as an audiobook. What is the importance of the window and the mirror, because those of us in library life know it, but others may not.
Yes, there is a concept that was written about, and I have completely forgotten the name of the first person to publish about it. Tanisha, you might remember, but about the importance in reading. She particularly talks about it in like elementary education, but it's really important for everyone of all ages, of not just having a window into a different world, being exposed to communities that you're not familiar with, to people with life experiences that you don't share, but also the severe importance of mirrors, seeing yourself represented in media, seeing people who are your same complexion, people who share your marginalities, people who share your disability, people who share your neurodivergence, people who, knowing that people know that you exist and being able to see other people like you. So windows and mirrors are an important balance in reading, watching, consuming, listening, whatever, for a lot of people, because there's so much that you can get from both sides.
But that's, I like that you said consuming, right? So it's not always the reading. There are other ways that we take in information and we take in our representation. And so multiple contributors talked about representation matters, and how when they discovered a piece of something, whether that was a book, whether that was a movie, whether that was a telenovela, seeing themselves in a different space, or who they could connect with, the impact that they made on them, that made on them. Which leads me to the question around banned books. Many of the books that someone may see themselves in, there may be other folks who feel like that particular title, piece of literature is not appropriate, I guess, for lack of a better word. What do we do about that? How do we, if someone feels represented in it, especially queer, BIPOC individuals, because that tends to be the titles that are banned, are challenged, and what do we do? One, as members of society, but then also as librarians.
We work our hardest to uplift those titles, to make sure that they're available to people, to counter the argument that these titles are somehow detrimental to society because they don't present a fully white, cisgender, heteronormative reality, which we know is the reality to some people, but not to all of us. We continue to argue the Library Bill of Rights idea that every book has its reader and every reader has their book. Because there are so many books in the world, and this tiny percentage of books that actually present faces and voices of people who don't always feel heard, feel seen. It's maybe 1 to 5% of publishing, and there's so much more for everyone else. So we just need to make sure that as well as we can possibly make them available to the people who need them, which isn't just the people who share these representations, although they are the most important for having access to those books, but for people, that one person who is going to understand so much more out of picking up a book or any other type of media whose eyes might be opened because they haven't experienced someone else's life. They haven't met these people, but they can meet them through a book. We have to make sure that we're not taking those voices away from the people who share them and the people who really need to hear them. And the people who are arguing against them kind of need them the most, even though we know that they're not going to pick them up, they're not going to change their minds, but we can't let them mandate what everyone else needs.
Yeah, that was, and this is why I call you the queen of words. What you just, you write it and you say it so beautifully. There was a line in the book that really stood out to me, and felt like it was a theme, a connecting theme or underlining theme in the book. And Adriana Herrera talks about a hard-fought space that for certain communities, certain individuals, and we're talking about representation again, and this also leads into the challenging, it's a hard-fought space to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged. Was that in the back or the forefront of your mind as you were, one, asking folks to contribute to this, when you're putting the idea together for the book, in your work, everything?
It was very much forefront, and we all, as a group of contributors, as a publishing collective, sort of lucked out in the home that we found in Berkeley Publishing, because they are working so hard to have some of these voices. But I sort of asked and let everyone go at it, as far as talking about the challenges and the fight and the ways that we still have not reached where we could be, as far as representation, and especially in publishing, but everywhere else too.
This, there was someone who talked about, I'm trying to read my own scribbles because of course I was like reading and writing, about romance being an escape and a reprieve.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what drew you to romance? Was an escape and a reprieve? Or, I know you've talked in other interviews about, and folks in the room may not have heard some of them, but like, what drew you to romance? Why romance? Why not nonfiction, or for me, murder mystery?
It is an escape, and honestly, I didn't have a horrible upbringing. Like I lived a relatively quiet life, but romance as a collection of stories drew me in, because I've realized now, in part, it's because it ends happily. Like I said before, I get a guaranteed conclusion of emotional satisfaction, which you can't get in some other genres. But also sort of living other people's lives, being able to experience their personal growth, and watching them fall in love. Love stories are the best. You can argue with me all you want, but stories about people falling in love are the best stories. And I find those in all other types of media too, but I always find myself coming back to romance because they're the ones who do it the best.
For folks who may be new to romance, so you did a training once in our readers advisory group about what a romance typically looks like, so what you can expect. Can you give a quick overview for folks in the room who may be like, I don't know if I want to read that? Like, What does a romance novel typically, the path it follows?
Sure. So in a romance that follows what we call the beats, between two or more people, there is sort of an establishment of characters. We meet everyone who's going to be involved. The meet cute or meet disaster or change of situation if they already know each other. And then there's all of the why can't we be together, which covers a lot of the story. And it has to answer why can't we be together. And then there's often a dark moment in which people who have worked their way into a relationship are torn apart for some reason. And then sometimes a grand gesture, sometimes a conversation. Conversations are the best. And they come back together, and there's an emotionally satisfying ending, also known as the happily ever after or the happy for now. And it can happen in any kind of situation. There are a million romance subgenres. Basically, as long as there's a central love story and a happily ever after, it's a romance. It can be a dystopian novel, it can be historical fiction, it can be sci-fi, it can be fantasy, it can be contemporary, but it has to have those two things.
It's funny too, because I remember after that training, every time I read a romance novel, I'd be like, okay, is there a grand gesture? What is the conflict? Like I was, like trying to follow what you had said. I was like, oh yeah, it did the things, which made it also more satisfying. One, that I had learned this thing, but I was also seeing it sort of in print. We know that publishing is difficult, especially for those in marginalized communities. What was this journey like to then get this in the hands of folks? Sorry, I gotta tilt it right. You don't have to tell us all the things, but will you share a little bit about what that journey was?
It was a bit of a haul. Let's call it a half marathon. And like I said, I have a place of privilege where I kind of know people in the business. So even the birth of Black Love Matters started with me talking to a writer friend who I used to write with every Saturday at a bakery, and telling her that about sort of my reaction to Well-Read Black Girl and how I had this thought of this book. And she was like, well, do you know anybody that you could ask about it? And I was like, well, I happen to be mutuals on Twitter with an agent. Maybe I should ask her, but maybe not. And my friend kind of pushed me to at least send a DM to ask her if it was a good idea. And all of a sudden I had an agent because she thought it was a great idea and guided me through the process of getting a nonfiction book published, which starts out with a long proposal, which I had to write first, and I had to start reaching out to all of these people that I admire, whose work I admire, whose books I read, to see if they'd be interested in contributing. And that was, I had to build up a lot of courage for that, but I did it. And now we have this amazing group of people who contributed to this book. And then there was, of course, the process of talking to publishers, and we talked to a few before we ended up with Berkeley, and they guided us through the rest.
Patience and perseverance.
Patience and perseverance.
Which you see in romance novels.
Absolutely.
So you're the perfect person for it. Our time, you and I, our time for chatting is coming to an end, because we're going to open up some space for folks who are attending to ask you questions. But I wanted to close with a couple of things. You and I, so yesterday we chatted about something that was not related to this, and I had a very emotional moment with you about your acknowledgments. where you talked about to every Black woman who has encouraged me or pushed me, who sought to help me understand my worth, whether teacher, colleagues, friends, family, or that ubiquitous other. Thank you for showing me who I could be and what I could do, even when I wasn't sure myself. And that was really amazing, because I think what you have done in introducing us, especially those of us in spaces where we feel like we're not seen, introducing us to stories that say, you can find love, you deserve love, you can have all of the things your heart desires. You have seen us and you have helped us on that path. So I want to say thank you for that, especially on an individual level. But I would like to end with the last paragraph of your introduction, and you can speak on it if you would like. You say, the goal in the end is to impress upon those who need most that Black love matters, that Black people have full, meaningful lives, and that in a world that hasn't often allowed it to us, happily ever after is ours to grab hold of, to wear against our hearts. It's the least we deserve. Why was it important for you to end your introduction as we move through all of these experiences with that paragraph?
It's the least we deserve. Like, there's so much that we talk about, especially in nonfiction centering Black people, that is all of this trauma that we've experienced as a people. And we often forget about the joys that we have had to fight for and to really hold on to as hard as possible before it was taken away. So ending my introduction with that sort of set the tone for all of the different ways that Black love has and hasn't been seen in media and in life.
Jessica Pryde. You are amazing. This book is amazing. I hope you're starting work on the second edition of this or some other piece. You could write your own romance novel. Hint, hint, push, push. You are fantastic. You are a wonderful human being. You are an amazing librarian. You are you are all of the things. I am so happy to know you. We are so blessed to have you as a member of our community and supporting us and helping us learn and grow. This has been wonderful. Thank you for this space to talk through the things with you and give a piece of yourself in your work and the other contributors to the folks in our community. So I'm so happy that I got to start my morning with you in this way. Y'all get the book. Ray is gonna come on and share some of the questions from the audience. Jessica, my friend, you mean the world to me, and thank you for doing this thing. This is about the representation, and this is gonna move things forward in so many ways. So.
Thank you, Tanisha. Thank you for guiding this conversation so effortlessly.
Hey, Jessica, like Tanisha said, you're amazing, and I love this segment so far. Thank you. We do have a few questions in the chat and also a few comments that I wanted to read off. First from Sharon, who also related to your move from Washington, D.C. They have said they had culture shock too, moving from St. Louis. And also a comment from Debbie saying, yes, Jessica's a pusher. She is my romance dealer too. And I must admit, romance is not really my thing either, but now I'm so excited. Like, I just want to jump in and read some romance now. So the first question from Karen is, how important was it for you to include LGBT voices in this volume?
It was imperative. And I am so glad that I was able to bring in the voices that are included. It's in part because it's part of my experience, and I would have been willing to write about it if I needed to, because it needed to be included in Black Love Matters, but also there are so many other experiences that we don't talk a whole lot about in representation, and the Black queer experience is a huge one. And I was so glad to be able to have people of multiple genders talk about their own experience and feelings and relationship with the concept of Black love. And so for those of you who haven't been able to pick up the book yet, there are 4 authors who are in some way of the family queer. Adriana Herrera talks about her experience as a Afro-Latinx person reading and writing romance, and the books that she writes are about queer Caribbean people living in the US. We have Nicole M. Jackson, who writes about finding queer stories and writing those queer stories. We have Kosoko Jackson, who is not related to Nicole, who is publishing his first adult Black queer romance this month. And he's written some YA books as well, and he talks about finding those queer archetypes in media. And we have Deshawn Harrison, who is a spectacular person, and they posit what needs to happen in life and the representation and exposure of desire and desirability before we can really have a true form of Black love. So it's sprinkled throughout, and I'm so glad that we were able to really talk about some of the concepts that they all have, as far as the queer side of Black love as the world, society, whatever you want to call it, shows itself to be more and more queer and queer. There was another word that I was trying to think of and I can't remember it.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm so excited that you included Kosoko Jackson. I can't wait to read the newer book that's coming out, I'm So Not Over You. It seems so good. But the next question is from Sharon that says, I've noticed more queer media offered on Netflix or other streaming services. Do you have an opinion about the mix of trauma and celebratory storytelling?
Sorry, can you say the last few words again? Trauma
Yeah.
and...
Do you have an opinion about the mix of trauma and celebratory storytelling?
I am happy that there is a mix. I will probably always lean further towards the celebratory storytelling, but there's something important in the storytelling that presents trauma, because we can't ignore it. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist. And we sort of, one of the reasons that I do love romance is because a lot of authors, especially in the last couple of years, have found that balance. And I think that a balance of really talking about the traumatic experiences that queer people have had in the past and continue to have now, does not keep them from finding the celebratory side of the story. Sort of that anything can happen because it'll end well kind of thing. Even though a lot of the stories that are coming up on in places like Netflix might have less of that happy ending, but still an emotionally satisfying one.
All right. Next question is, are there any plans to write a romance novel yourself?
You know, I've been thinking about it. I dabble. I have a lot of ideas for a lot of stories, but I haven't been able to really find the time and space to produce a quality one. But you might see my name on a romance novel someday.
I hope so. Another question. What are some of your favorite tropes in romance novels?
I do love a good trope. My favorite is for some reason rivals to lovers or hating to dating, as I think I heard in a training, which probably comes from way too many years of Pride and Prejudice fan fiction. But I love sort of that element of forced proximity that people have to figure themselves out and learn about the people that they're falling in love with without being able to leave. And fake dating is always great. I think if I had all three of those in one story, that would be the ultimate romance novel for me. Having people who don't particularly like each other being forced to be together while fake dating.
I love fake dating. That has to be my favorite. Um, the next question, you spoke a bit about approaching Beverly Jenkins. How did you decide on authors that were included?
I made a master list of people who either had sort of an important space in either romance or romance review or commentary or anything like that, and sort of went down the line. People who had been around for a long time. Actually, Miss Bev gave me other names to approach. People whose books I really liked. Like I'm not gonna lie, there are some people who are like, I love your work, please work with me. And some people who just had really great voices online in their own what do you call it, in their own circles. And I will say openly that a couple people are like immediate friends.
So it looks like we're about ready to end soon. I want to get one more question in. Um, if we wanted to buy your book, where should we go? And are there any book signings you're having?
If you want to buy my book today and get it signed and see me in person, I will actually be at the Eastside Barnes and Noble in Tucson at 2 o'clock today. And they have copies, and I will be there signing books. And if you are not going to make it there today or live elsewhere, you can get it off of the Big Evil River, or you can buy it from bookstore.org, which will offer a little bit of money to the independent bookstore of your choice, or go immediately to any independent bookstore of your choice. And you can get it in print, ebook, and audiobook.
All right, thanks, Jessica. It looks like that's all the time we have for today. Is there anything else you would like to add before we go?
Just thank you all for joining us today and for listening to me ramble about my work. And I hope that you enjoy the book and find something enlightening out of it.
Thank you so much for an amazing event, Jessica and Tanisha. I had a really great time, and I can't wait to find some romance books to read. And thank you to all of those who joined us today. Your support means a lot to the LGBTQ plus Services Committee. Keep a lookout for more author events in our 25th anniversary series to be announced soon. Thank you.